Welcome back. This is episode 9 of Bando's Breakdowns. My name is Zain Bando, and this show is presented by Playback, courtesy of the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. Thank you again for joining me in another edition of this show where it's going to be my unfiltered takes in 30 to 45 minutes as we do every single week on this show. And it'll also be bring in a bit of a newer age as for this week, so be sure to check this one out. This one will release on Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific, so be sure to check it out on that special date. But for now, it's going to be the same content as you guys are used to, so we're going to move right into the introduction as to what we're going to be talking about today. So going into that, pretty much today's contents of the show is going to be, we're going to be going over the NBA Finals, the Stanley Cup Final, some MLB news and notes with the current standings, Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler, in the postponement of that fight, as well as a couple other things too. But before we get into that, we just wanted to remind you to please like and subscribe. Be sure to follow the show across social media at youtube.com/ETB Network, as we are slowly but surely approaching 1,000 subscribers. So every single like, share, retweet, et cetera, across the social platforms also helps a ton. You can follow the network across social media at ETB Network. You can follow myself, Zain Bando. I'm a sports journalist and ETB Network co-host. You can follow me at ZanBando99 across all social media. You can follow this show at Bando's Breakdowns across social media as well. And of course, I just wanted to remind you guys once again that this show is presented by Playback. So getting right into that, presented by Playback, watching sports is more fun with others, but we spend too much of our time watching alone. Playback is a virtual space where communities can live stream sports together with everyone perfectly synced up. Creators can hop on stage, deliver their own play-by-play analysis and commentary, and invite viewers up for Q&A. Playback makes watching sports fully interactive and a social experience, from playing fantasy sports, rubbing your favorite players and teams, and watching with the communities and commentators you care about. Win or lose, sports are best enjoyed together. And of course, you can check us out by going to playback.tv/ETB Network to find out more, including our live stream schedule. So with that out of the way, we're going to go right into it, starting with the introduction. He said just alluded to, we're going to be talking about all different kinds of sports today, but we're going to start out with the NBA Finals. So, as we all know, they just concluded the other night. The Celtics won the series 4-1, and of course, they raised their 18th championship banner, passing the LA Lakers all time. This was, I guess, in so many words, an underwhelming series. I was expecting a little bit more out of these two teams. The Celtics looked great. The Mavericks played mostly flat. And I just truly feel bad for Luka Doncic, because I do feel that he's the future of the league. But I think when you're going up against the three-headed monster in the Celtics that have one of the youngest coaches in the league and one of the most brilliant minds in the league with all of his pregame tactics and whatnot, it's going to be the bearer of bad news. So, I do think the Celtics did deserve to win the series. Was it going to go 5 games? I had the Celtics in 6 going into this one, but, just looking at the overall landscape of both of these teams, you just knew that Boston was better on paper, and they were able to prove that and then some. So this was obviously a very fun, pretty fun close to the series. Game 5 was definitely an electric atmosphere at the TD Garden. It seems like everybody had just a fantastic time, and Boston had that game in hand very, very early on. I'd say about mid-third quarter, where everybody knew that Boston was going to win a championship. So you got to feel happy for Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, Al Horford finally winning a ring. That's cool to see, but I think that this Boston team is going to be together for the next couple of years. It'll be interesting to see what pieces they add. And of course, if you're a New York Knicks fan, you're probably not too happy that Kristaps Porzingis won a title in Boston before winning a title in New York, but that's either here or there. So congratulations to the Celtics winning their 18th championship, as I just alluded to, 18th championship in franchise history. First time they won a title since 2008, and they actually did win it on the exact same date. It was June 17th, 2008, and now June 17th, 2024. The Boston Celtics are your NBA champions, and it'll be a very interesting offseason to see if they can repeat. Obviously, one of the most lowest rated NBA finals probably in recent memory. Probably one of the most underwhelming NBA finals, but at the very least, for the betterment of sports, I guess you could say, Boston was the better team, and they were able to take care of business on their home floor. So that's good to see. Transitioning over to the Stanley Cup final, the series is not over. It is not. It is not even close to over. The Edmonton Oilers won Game 5 to force a Game 6. They became the first road team in the modern era to trail 3 games to none, and win a road game to keep their hopes alive. It started in Edmonton with an 8-1 win, and and of course, and of course Tuesday night in Sunrise with Florida looking to close the series out. They weren't able to do it, and the Oilers were able to come away with the win. Stewart Skinner did really well. Did really well in net. Connor McDavid wrapped it up with the empty net goal to seal it, and they were able to prevent Florida from winning on their home ice. So now Friday's game in Edmonton is going to be very interesting. Can Connor McDavid keep the momentum? Can the veteran core of Florida try to find a way to end the series? On the road. In a in Alberta, where Edmonton, has played fairly well over the last couple of weeks, and it seems like all the momentum is swinging their way. And I'm sure that Panthers fans have a bit of deja vu, just considering, that last year they did lose in 5 games to the Vegas Golden Knights in the Stanley Cup Finals. So, there's a lot at stake. Could I be reading too much into it? Could the Panthers very easily win Game 6? There is absolutely that possibility. There's no question about it. But I just think seeing this series continue, seeing the history that Edmonton has, seeing that they're trying to win their first Stanley Cup title since 1990, seeing the way that they're doing it, the way that they're playing together, it's very, very interesting. So stay tuned. We got a game on Friday night. That'll be at an 8 p.m. Eastern puck drop on ABC, and then if necessary, back at Sunrise Game 7 um, on Monday night, also at 8 p.m. Eastern. So a lot to be excited about from the Stanley Cup Finals front. But just a little update: the Florida Panthers, after being up 3 games to none, have now had 2 chances to close the series out, and they've yet to do so. They will potentially have 2 more to do exactly that later on this weekend and in next week. So very, very interesting just to kind of think about that and review that as we move along. Kind of shifting over and shifting gears a little bit. We're going to talk about the WNBA, because the WNBA has been back in the news again, and of course the two big headliners, Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, did face off in Indiana over the weekend. They're going to be they're going to be rematching once again in Chicago in the next couple of days, and those ticket prices are at a premium. But what I want to talk about are a couple of things. You know, First off, these are without question the two biggest stars in the WNBA. Let's just get that right out of the way for a second. I'm just going to be honest. If it wasn't for these two stars, and if it wasn't for these two polarizing figures, I don't think people would care as much as they do about this league. And that's not a knock on the entire WNBA. As I've alluded to in other episodes on this very show, I haven't really been too public about it on social media, but I am going to be blunt on this show here. Is that I do think it's good for the game when you have these two. Some people consider them antagonists. Some people consider both of them protagonists. But the fact of the matter is that people care. According to Bleacher Report and several other sources, this was the most watched WNBA game on any network in 23 years. What does that say? Personality sells. Um, so social media sells itself. Good overall basketball talent sells itself. And regardless of what you think about the flagrant foul, and regardless of what you think about, either of these two, or where you stand, if you're Team Reese, Team Clark, Team WNBA, anti WNBA, you have to respect the fact that now even more money is being pumped into this thing. More eyeballs are being attained. More people are buying, merchandise and tickets and what have you. There's more at stake now with this league than there was even ever before, and that's just the overall growth of women's college basketball. And it started at the college level with players like these two, where they were on, national TV every 5 days and people cared. So just to give you a little bit of context, according to this Bleacher Report article from a couple of days ago, the Indiana Fever's 91-83 win over the Chicago Sky on Sunday averaged nearly 2.3 million viewers, according to CBS Sports. And for those of you guys who don't know, the games are mainly streamed on WNBA League Pass, CBS Sports, ESPN, and a couple of other networks. So to even get 2.3 million people to see this when you have, the likes of, several Stanley Cup final games, as we just alluded to in the last segment, the NBA finals, when you have several UFC events, when you have boxing, when you have the Olympics, when you have all of this stuff going on at the same time, it's a pretty unique feat that he's toward at the center of it. So keep paying attention to this story, because even though the flagrant foul is what everybody's talking about in all the post game banter, what I think is the most interesting is that it's gathering attention, it's gathering eyeballs. Those people are talking about it. I'm talking about it. It's someone who is in no way a WNBA expert by any means, and I don't claim to be. I just think it's very interesting that this is truly what people are interested in when it comes to the WNBA, and it's only going to continue. The more that names like these are in the headlines, the more that names like Cardozo are in the headlines, the more that names when you go down to the college level, the more the more that Juju Watkins and some of these other players are in the headlines. People are going to continue to talk about them, and I think that's the most interesting and unique part of this whole circumstance. All right, we're going to shift gears from the court to the octagon. We're going to go into UFC Saudi Arabia. It's taking place during the day on Saturday afternoon in the United States from Saudi Arabia. We got Robert Whittaker taking on Ikram Aliskerov in a very huge fight, and all of a sudden has become arguably one of the biggest fights in the middleweight division. For a little bit of context, just the other day, we had the announcement Dricus du Plessis is finally defending his middleweight title against Israel Adesanya. Super high profile fight that's been brewing for over a year and a half. And all the people who are saying that Sean Strickland deserves the shot, what I have to say is there's no issue with fresh matchups, and people have to respect that. But back to Whittaker versus Aliskerov. This is a huge fight. Aliskerov 15-1. His only loss in his professional career is to Hamza Chimaev, who Whittaker was supposed to fight. As we all know, Chimaev pulled out and was violently ill, according to Dana White. So that fight has been scrapped. And I think this is a fantastic main event. We broke it down in a bit more detail in the MMA Outsiders, but just briefly here. By the way, if you haven't checked out the newest episode of the MMA Outsiders, go do so. It released Tuesday night at 7 Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific on this great network. You can go check it out here and wherever you get your podcast. But in retrospect, when looking at this fight, this is a fight where you've got Robert Whittaker, who's the former middleweight champion of the world, has not claimed gold in about 4 years, taking on a guy in Aliskerov that I don't think a lot of people know about, but is very dangerous in his own right. He's had a couple of really nice wins in the UFC, et cetera, et cetera. But I think looking at Whittaker, he knows that this is his last opportunity. He knows that, his back is against the wall, where if he doesn't lose this fight, it's going to be an uphill battle to get back into the position that he's in now, let alone even compete for a championship. So he knows that there's a lot at stake here, and I think that's one of the reasons why I'm picking Whittaker. And I did pick Whittaker on the show by fourth round TKO. Is I think his longevity, his gas tank, and his striking ability is simply better than Aliskerov, and I think it's something that he's going to exploit. If Aliskerov can keep it on the feet early, if he can land some good combinations and put Whittaker in some dangerous positions, we might have a bit of an upset on our hands here. But I love Robert Whittaker. I love the value that he brings. I think it's a fantastic main event. There's a lot of good UAE prospects on the card. There's so much to be excited about, and the main card at least is airing on ABC, with the prelims on ESPN. So there's a lot to be excited about there. So we'll be sure to not miss it again. UFC Saudi Arabia this Saturday, June 22nd, second to last UFC event in the month of June. A lot to be excited about there. So just Stay tuned, don't miss it, and we'll have a full recap on episode 89 next week, where we'll chronicle that and UFC 303. And speaking of what is going on with the UFC 303 and the like, we're going to talk about the possibility of Netflix potentially becoming one of the newest broadcast partners for the UFC. It is being reported by the Sports Business Journal within the last several days that the UFC could potentially be in talks with Netflix for a new TV deal. Potentially, when their contract expires in 2025. I'm pretty sure it's at the end of 2025, if I'm not mistaken. In any event, though, this is gigantic. I mean, Netflix is now in the business of boxing. They're in the business of live comedy. They're in the business of potentially the NFL. Well, up in energy, they will be in the business. They will be in business with the NFL later in December. But my point in bringing this all up is that Netflix is really trying to shoot for the stars when it comes to this live sports thing. The UFC's virality, the UFC's social media marketing strategy, the way they go about promoting the fighters and promoting their champions, it's a perfect fit for Netflix. As we all know, the pay-per-view model is going away. It's going into more, an a la carte streaming uh, respect, or however you want to describe it. Where you pay, upfront a certain fee and you get everything, or you have no subscription and you just pay a flat fee, very similar to what PPV.com is doing. So if the UFC goes over to Netflix, I think you could very well see, a possibility where the pay-per-views are on, Netflix, the numbered UFCs, i.e. UFC 303, et cetera, and you could very well see the fight night shows, which have been primarily on ESPN Plus and not linear ESPN. You could maybe see them all go to ESPN Plus, which I actually think would make it easier, because if you think about it, that's sort of how the NFL is. The NFL has the AFC package, and the NFL CBS rights deal has the AFC package, and Fox has the NFC. It could very well be, something remotely similar to that. So this is still a developing story. There's not a whole lot out there to it outside of SBJ's report and Richard Deitch's ins- insights there from his latest podcast. But it'll be interesting to see what the UFC decides to do. Again, they still have over a year to figure out what they're going to do. But I do think this is a unique story to follow, considering that streaming is now the name of the game, and that's where all the leagues are going at this point. If a league doesn't stream, then I don't know how they're going to be able to survive. But that's either here or there as well. All right, we're gonna move right along to Dana White's interview with Jim Rome. He was on Jim Rome the other day promoting UFC 303 was his primary focus of being on. And obviously, he was asked about John Jones. And of course, he was asked about Conor McGregor. We're going to get into Conor McGregor a little bit more when I get into my Zain Zinger in just a couple of minutes. And I guess we might even transition into that depending on how the flow of this goes. But in any event, Dana White went on Jim Rome, and he basically just discussed, what the current state of the UFC was, promoted the new Fight Inc. documentary on Roku, which was a very, very interesting documentary. If you guys haven't seen it, it's 3 parts, 45 minutes per episode. You can get through it pretty quickly, no commercials, nothing like that. Rest of the world, it's on Fight Pass. So in case you don't know what Roku is, the UFC has you covered in that regard. But he did mention specifically regarding John Jones that he doesn't know if and when John Jones will ever fight again. And it disappoints me. And the reason why it disappoints me to hear that is because John Jones had a torn pectoral muscle that kept him out 6 months to a year. Okay. He was supposed to fight Stipe Miocic in November of 2023 at Madison Square Garden, UFC 295. That didn't happen. Obviously, Tom Aspinall is now the new interim heavyweight champion. He's going to be defending his title next month in Manchester against Curtis Blades. With all that being said, it's disappointing to hear that the same man that has called John Jones the pound for pound best fighter in the world, has claimed the media has no idea what they're talking about, is now the same guy going, oh, he might fight, he might not. So my question then is, as well as the question of thousands of other people, why in the world is he holding up the division? That question remains to be answered, whether or not the Jones Stipe fight gets done. But I thought that was super alarming as well. And I guess this kind of also ties into what I'm going to talk about next. But he gave some very, very interesting insights regarding the latest with Conor McGregor, what exactly happened, et cetera, et cetera. So I as with that being said, let me just quickly transition. Now we're gonna move briefly into college basketball, and then we're gonna get back to this in just a minute. But we had some pretty big transfer portal NIL news that took place a couple of days ago too. We had former Illini great Coleman Hawkins, who spent 4 years leading the Illini in several statistical categories, leading Illinois to two Big Ten two Big Ten tournament titles in a 4 year span. He has decided to commit to Kansas State as a grad transfer for an upward amount of $2 million. And I have to say, he's one of the best defenders in college basketball. I loved watching him play at U of I, especially in his junior and senior years. I thought he was fantastic. But man, $2 million is a lot of money. This is going to become, I think, the new norm in college basketball. You're going to see these guys move around. You're going to see, where the shifts and changes go. And if you go to a program like Kansas State under the direction of Jerome Tang, who's a very good coach in his own right, it's going to be very interesting to see what exactly happens with Hawkins. But he had a successful 4 years in Illinois. I'm so glad he's didn't go to a Big Ten rival school. Otherwise, I think people would have had some choice words for him. But this is great news if you're a hardcore college basketball fan. And Kansas State immediately just became a contender right alongside Kansas and the rest of the conference. So it'd be very, very exciting, and I'm excited to see what he does in his grad year as well. It's a very exciting time. Transitioning back to combat sports, though, we had breaking news about Jake Paul within the last 24 to 48 hours, and that is that even though he's no longer fighting Mike Tyson on July 20th, that fight has been moved to November. Pretty sure it's November 16th. His replacement is going to be BKFC superstar and champion Mike Perry, who has really made a name for himself and has really built a brand for himself ever since leaving the UFC a couple years ago. Has become a stud in the BKFC realm. This is a fantastic fight. And, this could very well be a risk for Jake Paul. Mike Perry is one of the most exciting fighters outside of the UFC that's really embraced the bare knuckle thing. He's called out Jake Paul on several occasions. He's one of those guys that's always fun, that's always entertaining, that's always exciting. Someone who just genuinely cares about being the best fighter that he can. And I'm sure he loves this because they're both going to get paid a lot of money. It's going to be exclusively on DAZN pay-per-view from Tampa, Florida at Amalie Arena, home of the Tampa Bay Lightning. This should be a fire fight. What's going to be interesting, though, is they're going to be competing against Clarissa Shields' super heavyweight boxing match that's taking place in Detroit. I'm not going to bother saying her opponent's name right now because it's very difficult to pronounce. And it will also be going up against UFC 304, which I mentioned earlier in the podcast. It will, or actually, it won't be going up against UFC 304. It'll be going up against a UFC Apex card. So that actually kind of works out for them a little bit. But this could very well easily be the fight of the week. And so don't miss it. And again, a huge trap fight for Jake Paul, because if he loses the Mike Tyson promotion, in all due respect, could be very, very interesting to say the least. Now we're going to move back into what I was talking about earlier. We're going to move into Zain Zinger, which we're going to keep it simple this week. It's the Conor McGregor Michael Chandler postponement, and my thoughts on it. This is obviously a devastating blow to what was going to be UFC 303 International Fight Week. As I've already alluded to, UFC 303 is still on. They're not canceling the card. If you guys haven't heard by now, there's been a couple bout switches, new main event, new co-main event. We broke that all down on the MMA Outsider. So if you don't know what the current status is of the UFC 303 card itself, go check it out. But this is true. McGregor Chandler has been postponed. And there's so many overarching layers to this story. But I think the biggest one of them all is the fan disappointment. Um, just to give you a little context, I've been watching Conor McGregor since 2013 when he was still in Cage Warriors as a two division champion over there. I don't think I've been more disappointed in a fight postponement in a very long time. I was excited to see how Conor McGregor was going to look. I was excited to see, the McGregor revolt come back. I was even more excited for that Dublin press conference, which got postponed. And I was excited to see Michael Chandler make the most money he's ever made in his entire career. Gone, 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 and then some, at least for now. And I feel like the UFC didn't do the greatest job of owing the fans an explanation as to why any of this even happened. If it wasn't for Ariel Helwani's reporting, and you could say whatever you want about Helwani as a person, but if it wasn't for his reporting, we would have not known the story that we did. We would have not known the shifts and changes with the event. We wouldn't have known anything. So kudos to him for being the only guy willing to report what he knew at the time and that he knew it, even with the very minimal on the record stuff. And that's very important, on the record stuff that he could report, given that, if you're told something off the record, you can't report it. So that to me is the most interesting thing. They need a date. Hopefully it's August 31st. I don't see how they pull the Paris card from all those fans on September 28th. The weekend of my birthday, that Saturday is September 21st. They don't have a fight. Could they slide it in there? That remains to be seen. They're not going to do the fight in Salt Lake City. They won't do the fight in Australia. They won't do the fight in London. The fight has to be in Vegas. So they have very few options. But at the very least, this fight's going to happen. We've waited too long. Conor McGregor is going to be 36 in July. Michael Chandler is getting up there in age. He's nearly 40 years old. This fight has to happen. And hopefully one day we'll find out, at least from the UFC side, how difficult it was to postpone this fight, but maybe we'll never know. I guess the irony of that Fight Inc. documentary coming out, literally days before this was all going down, and the McGregor fight was in limbo, was to me just incredibly ironic. But very disappointed as both an MMA fan and as a member of the media that this fight is no longer taking place. All right, we're going to quickly wrap up the show here. Going over to Zain's look ahead. Just a quick reminder of some stuff that's coming up. We got Olympic track and field trials coming up. We had swimming trials a couple of days ago. There's so much Olympics content that's going to be coming out in the next couple of weeks for NBC and the various other networks that will be covering it. So just a reminder to please set your alarms, because all of the events are taking place in Paris, which means all of the times are going to be messed up. So just keep that in mind and do with it what you will. And just really briefly, before we wrap up the show as well, I just wanted to quickly go over the MLB standings really quick. So the Yankees currently lead the American League East. That is by a 2.5 game cushion over the Baltimore Orioles. We got the Cleveland Guardians with a 4.5 game lead over the Minnesota Twins in the American League Central. We got the Seattle Mariners with a comfortable 10-game lead over the Houston Astros in the American League West. And looking over to the National League, the Phillies lead the NL East by 8 games over the Atlanta Braves. We get the Milwaukee Brewers in a pretty tight race with the St. Louis Cardinals and Cincinnati Reds. They currently lead by 6.5 games with a 43-30 record. And of course, as you guys all know, I'm a Cubs fan. They're sitting in dead last. They're a dumpster fire, 35-39 on the season. I have very little hope in the middle of June, but that remains to be seen. And then, of course, the LA Dodgers are cooking in the NL West with a 46-29 record. And of course, they are up by 9 games over the Arizona Diamondbacks. So again, this is at the time that we're recording this Wednesday, June 19th. The standings, of course, with a very long season, are subject to change. All right, now we're gonna finally close it out, and I just wanted to quickly go over. We're gonna move into Zan's errors, which I don't believe I had any this week, which is always a positive sign of a good show when you.
Let me add one thing.
Do you have a note?
Yeah, let me add a note, because you actually did a very good job. I wouldn't even call this Zan's errors. I would just add some context to some things that you said. So just to go
Okay.
back to the Stanley Cup, there was actually a really good stat, actually, that the 0-3 deficit has actually been done before in the NHL playoffs, but you got to go back to 1942.
Right. It's the first time in the modern era. That's correct.
So it can be done, number one. Number two, you were talking about the UFC contract with ESPN. You were correct. The 1.5 billion, it's up in 2025. And I agree with you. I could see Netflix totally sliding in and taking that over.
I could
So
too. Yeah,
just
absolutely.
and then just some breaking news that happened during your
Oh
show.
wow. Okay.
Cameron Brink suffered a torn ACL and is probably done for the season for the Sparks.
Oh, that's bad news for the WNBA. You want to talk about a ratings juggernaut? That just took a pretty big hit. That's
But
not good.
but I think you're totally right about the WNBA. By the way, Angel Reese can't play the villain very well. She acts like it and then she cries when she doesn't get the calls.
That's exactly right.
So I'll let you
Remember,
finish up, but that's just some notes for context.
thank you very much. I appreciate it. Shout out to my producer for those notes. So with that being said, that's going to do it. Episode 9, Bando's Breakdowns. Thank you again for tuning in to this edition presented by Playback, obviously in courtesy of the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. We will be back next week, normal time as usual. Sorry to confuse all of you, but with that being said, we're going to be back normal time next week, Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific, for more news and notes in the world of sports. And of course, by then we will have a Stanley Cup champion. Will it be the Florida Panthers or the Edmonton Oilers? That remains to be seen. But until next week, I'm Zain Bando. Thank you very much for watching or listening, whatever your method of choice is. And I will see you guys next week. Have a good one.